$26,000. That's what I spent planning our 10th anniversary trip to Rome. Not because I had to, not because my wife asked me to, but because I wanted her to feel like the woman I married still deserved the world. I should have paid more attention to who she had become. My name doesn't matter much for this story. What matters is that I'm a structural engineer, 51 years old, and I built my career the same way I built everything else in my life, one solid foundation at a time. I grew up in a small town in Ohio where nobody handed you anything. My father worked construction until his back gave out, and my mother cleaned offices at night so I could go to college. I never forgot where I came from. I also never forgot what it felt like to want more and to actually go get it. By the time I was 40, I had my own firm. Small, but respected. The kind of place where contractors called us because they knew we didn't cut corners. I wasn't flashy about money. I drove a truck that was 6 years old. I coached Little League on Saturday mornings for 8 years, even after my own son aged out, just because I liked the kids. I was not, by any measure, a difficult man to be married to. My wife and I had been together for 14 years. Married for 10. We met at a conference in Chicago when she was working in hotel management, and I was there for an engineering summit. She walked into the wrong session, sat down next to me, and spent the next 20 minutes pretending she meant to be there. I found that charming. I found everything about her charming back then. We built a life in Charlotte, North Carolina. Nice house, not extravagant. 2 dogs. A son who was now 19 and away at college. By the outside world's measurement, we were doing well. What the outside world didn't see was the slow drift that had been happening for about 2 years. I noticed it the way you notice a crack in a wall. Small at first, easy to dismiss, but always there in the corner of your eye. She started going out more with her friends from her new job at the hotel group downtown. She started being vague about plans. She started sleeping facing away from me every single night without exception. And when I would put my hand on her shoulder in the morning, she would go stiff, just for half a second, before relaxing again. That half second. I cataloged every one of them. I did not say anything. Not yet. I am an engineer. I gather data before I draw conclusions. The anniversary trip was my way of trying to pour new concrete into an old crack. Maybe I was naive. Maybe I already knew and just wasn't ready to say it out loud. Either way, I spent 3 months planning a 10-day trip to Italy. Rome for 5 days, then a train north to Florence, then a few days in a small village in Tuscany that a colleague had recommended. I rented a private villa for the last 4 nights. I booked business class flights. I arranged a private tour of the Vatican that cost more than my first car. I told my wife about it over dinner one Thursday night in early spring. I laid out the whole itinerary. She cried. She said it was the most thoughtful thing anyone had ever done for her. She hugged me for a long time at the kitchen counter, and I remember thinking, maybe I was wrong about the drift. Maybe this is all we needed. 2 weeks later, her mother called me. My mother-in-law is a woman who has never, in the 14 years I have known her, passed up an opportunity to make herself the center of something. She lives 40 minutes away and somehow manages to insert herself into every major decision we make. When we renovated the kitchen, she showed up uninvited and told the contractors the tile I chose was ugly. When my son had his graduation party, she reorganized the food table while I was in the backyard grilling. I had learned to manage her with patience and distance in equal measure. She called to tell me that she and my brother-in-law, my wife's younger brother, were so excited about the Italy trip. She said she had heard it was going to be beautiful. She said she had always wanted to see the Colosseum. I asked her what she meant. She laughed the way people laugh when they think you already know something. She said, well, the whole family was going, wasn't that right? She said my wife had mentioned that the villa had plenty of room. I sat with that for a moment. Then I said I would call her back. I found my wife in the living room. I sat down across from her. I asked her, very calmly, to explain what her mother meant about the family coming to Italy. She did not look surprised. That was the first thing I noticed. She was not caught off guard. She had a prepared answer. She said she had been thinking it would be nice to include her mother and her brother on the trip, that it was a milestone anniversary and families should share milestones. She said the villa had 4 bedrooms, and we were only using 1, so it made sense. I asked why she hadn't mentioned this to me. She said she thought I would be fine with it. I took a breath. I asked if there was anyone else who would be joining us on my $26,000 anniversary trip that I did not yet know about. She hesitated. Half a second. That same half second I had been cataloging for 2 years. She said her friend Marcus might come along too. just for a few days. He had always wanted to see Florence. Marcus. I knew exactly who Marcus was. My wife had worked with him 3 years ago at her previous job. I had met him twice at company events. The second time I met him, he had touched the small of my wife's back in a way that lasted about 1 second longer than friendly, and she had laughed at something he said before she even heard the punchline. I filed that away. I did not make a scene. I am not a man who makes scene. I am not a man who makes scenes. But I filed it away, and I never forgot it. I looked at my wife and I said, "Marcus, as in your ex-boyfriend Marcus?" She said he wasn't exactly her ex, that they had just dated casually before she and I met, that it was ancient history, that he was just a friend now. I said that I had planned this trip for us. 10 years. Our anniversary. She said I was being rigid. She said I was making it weird. She said Marcus was harmless and her mother was family, and why did I always have to make everything so difficult? That word, difficult. 14 years of building her a life, and the word she reached for was difficult. I said I needed some time to think. She told me not to be dramatic. I went to my home office and I closed the door. I did not sleep that night. I am at my core a problem solver. When I am presented with a structural failure, I do not panic. I assess. I document. I determine what can be saved and what has to come down. I sat at my desk until 2 in the morning, going through everything I knew. Everything I had filed away over 2 years of small silences and half-seconds and vague answers and phone screens tilted just slightly away from me. I thought about the trip I had planned. I thought about the private Vatican tour and the villa with the view of the Tuscan hills and the restaurant in Rome I had reserved 4 months in advance. I thought about what it meant that my wife had, without asking me, decided to turn my anniversary gesture into a family vacation that included the man I was almost certain she had feelings for. I thought about the $26,000. Then I opened my laptop and I started making some calls. The next morning, my wife came downstairs and said she hoped I had gotten over it. She said her mother was already looking at flights. I said I wanted to talk about the trip. She sat down with her coffee and gave me that patient look she had started using on me, the one that made me feel like a problem she was managing. I told her that I had been thinking about it and she was right that the villa had extra rooms. I said that if her mother and her brother wanted to join for part of the trip, I could understand that. She relaxed. She smiled. She said she knew I would come around. I said, but I'm not comfortable with Marcus coming. Everything changed. She put down her coffee. She said I was being insecure. She said Marcus was her friend, and she was not going to exclude her friends from her life just because I had some irrational issue with him. She said if I was going to be like this, then maybe the trip wasn't worth taking. I asked her if she heard what she just said. She said she was not going to apologize for having friends. I said very quietly that this was our 10th anniversary, that I had spent 3 months and $26,000 planning something for the two of us, that I was asking her for one thing. Which was to not bring a man I was uncomfortable with on what was supposed to be a celebration of our marriage. She said I was controlling. I looked at her for a long moment. I looked at the woman I had driven to the emergency room at 3 in the morning when she had appendicitis. I looked at the woman I'd held in the parking lot of a grocery store when her father died for 45 minutes in the rain because she couldn't stop crying and I didn't want her to have to. I looked at the woman for whom I had built a life, carefully, the way I'd built everything, with attention and intention and no shortcuts. I said okay. She looked relieved. She thought okay meant I was backing down. It did not mean that. I went back to my office. I called my attorney, a man I had worked with for 8 years, named Gerald. I told him I needed to understand my options, and I needed him to be discreet. I spent an hour on that call. When I hung up, I felt the strange calm that comes when a decision has been made, and there is no longer any uncertainty about the path forward. Then I called the airline. All 4 tickets, mine, my wife's, my mother-in-law's, my brother-in-law's, my brother-in-law's, were in my name. I had booked them all on my card, through my account, because that was how I had done everything for 14 years. I canceled 3 of them. I kept mine. I called the villa. 4 bedrooms. Prepaid. Non-refundable. I spoke to the manager, a kind woman named Sylvia, and explained there had been a family situation. Sylvia was understanding. She said the villa would be available for 1 guest, and she would ensure everything was prepared. I thanked her. I called the Vatican tour, the restaurants, the train tickets. Everything was in my name. I updated everything to reflect 1 traveler. Then, I booked a room for 2 nights in Charlotte's nicest hotel. Check-in was the following evening. I packed a bag. One bag. I put in the things that mattered. My documents, my laptop, a week's worth of clothes, the watch my father gave me when I graduated college. I put the bag in the trunk of my truck. I went back inside and I made dinner. I sat at the table with my wife and I listened to her talk about what her mother wanted to see in Rome. And I said very little, and she did not notice. That night, after she fell asleep, I went to my home office one more time. I wrote a letter. Not angry, not cruel, just clear. I explained what I had done, and why, and what I believed was true about our marriage, and what I was going to do next. I left it on the kitchen counter under her coffee mug, so she would find it in the morning. I picked up my bag from the trunk. I drove to the hotel. I checked in. I slept better than I had in 2 years. The next morning, I was eating breakfast in the hotel restaurant when my phone started ringing. I let it go to voicemail. It rang again and again. Then I got a text from my mother-in-law that was written entirely in capital letters. Then one from my brother-in-law that called me several things I will not repeat. Then my wife called from a number I didn't recognize, which told me she had figured out that I had blocked her primary number at some point during breakfast. I finished my eggs. I had a second cup of coffee. Then I called my son at college. My son is 19 and sharp in the way that kids are when they've grown up watching their parents carefully. I had not said anything to him about any of this, but when I told him what had happened, there was a silence on the line. And then he said, "Dad, I've known something was wrong for a long time." I asked him what he knew. He told me about a night 8 months ago when he was home for a weekend, and he had seen his mother on the back patio at midnight talking on the phone, laughing quietly. He said he had seen the name on the screen. He said he had known how to tell me. The name on the screen was Marcus. I thanked my son. I told him this was not his burden to carry, and never had been. I told him I loved him and that nothing between his mother and me would ever change anything between him and me. He said, "I know, Dad. I know." I spent the next 3 days in that hotel getting my affairs in order. Gerald was thorough and efficient. I had always kept my finances carefully structured and my documentation organized. Habits from engineering that translated well into this. The house was jointly owned, but the equity calculation was straightforward. My business was mine. The accounts were cleanly divided between what was marital and what was not. On the 4th day, I found a furnished apartment 20 minutes from my office, month-to-month lease. Clean, quiet, plenty of light. I moved my one bag in. The Italy trip was in 6 weeks. I went. I stood in the Pantheon on a Tuesday morning with no one beside me, and I looked up at the Oculus, that perfect circle open to the sky, and I felt something shift in my chest that I can only describe as the specific grief of realizing you mourned the right thing. Not the marriage exactly, not even the woman, but the version of the future I had carried for 14 years. The one where we grew old in that house in Charlotte with the dogs and the occasional grandchildren, and the slow, comfortable rhythm of 2 people who had chosen each other and kept choosing each other. I let myself feel that for about 10 minutes, standing there in a 2,000-year-old building. Then I walked out into the Roman sunlight, and I found the restaurant I had booked months before, and I sat down and I ordered for one, and I ate the best meal of my life. The Tuscan villa was everything the photos promised. Sylvia, the manager I had spoken to on the phone, met me at the gate herself. She showed me the olive trees and the view of the hills going gold in the evening light, and the kitchen stocked with local cheese and wine. She said she was glad I had come. I said I was too, and I meant it. I spent 4 days there reading and walking and thinking and not thinking. My colleague who had recommended the place had been right. There was something in the quality of the silence there, the particular way the light fell through old shutters in the morning, that made it easy to simply exist without needing to be anything. On my last night, I sat on the terrace with a glass of wine and I thought about my father, who worked construction until his back gave out, and what he would say about all of this. I think he would say what he always said, which was that a structure is only as good as the decisions made before anyone starts building. That you cannot fix a bad foundation by adding more floors. That at some point the honest thing to do is to stop building and start over from solid ground. I flew home on a Sunday. The divorce was finalized 7 months later. Gerald was precise and I was patient, and the process was as clean as these things can be. My wife hired an attorney who made some noise early on and then quieted down when it became clear that my documentation was thorough and my position was reasonable. and I was not going to be moved by noise. I heard through the kind of indirect channels that exist in any small enough social world that Marcus had not exactly stepped up to fill the space my absence had created. I heard my mother-in-law had opinions about that. I did not find satisfaction in this information the way I might have expected. Mostly I felt nothing, and then I felt something close to pity, and then I went back to work. My firm took on 2 large projects that year. I hired 2 new engineers, both of them young and good and hungry in the right way. I coached Little League again in the spring. My son visited for a week in July, and we drove up to the mountains and hiked for 3 days and talked the way fathers and sons talk when there is nothing left to perform for each other. One evening on that trip, sitting outside after dinner with the fire going low, my son said, "Dad, do you regret any of it? The marriage, I mean. The whole thing." I thought about it honestly. I said, no. I said that I had loved his mother genuinely for a long time, and I believed she had loved me too for a portion of that time, and that none of that became untrue just because it ended. I said I had built a good life during those years, and the fact that the partnership dissolved did not erase what the partnership had built, which included, most importantly, him. He was quiet for a while. Then he said, "She told me you ruined the trip by canceling everything." I said, "I canceled my contributions. She was free to book her own trip." He laughed at that. Just once. Short but real. I laughed too. There is a thing I tell young engineers when they are starting out, when they are nervous and eager and afraid of getting something wrong. I tell them that in this work, clarity is kindness. A structural problem that is clearly identified and honestly assessed can almost always be solved. It is the problems that get covered over, the cracks that get painted, the foundations that nobody wants to discuss. Those are the ones that bring the building down eventually. The same is true, I have found, of most things worth building. I spent $26,000 learning that lesson in the clearest possible terms. I have paid more for less useful information. I still have the watch my father gave me when I graduated. I wear it every day. It keeps perfect time. That, I have come to understand, is all any of us can really do. Keep perfect time. Show up. Do the work. Build on solid ground or do not build at all. The rest takes care of itself, one way or another. And when it doesn't, when you look up and realize the foundation was never what you thought it was, well, you've already survived worse. You pack your one bag, and you drive toward whatever morning is waiting for you. And you trust that you built yourself sturdy enough to carry what comes next. I did.